she was humiliated by her ex-fiancé until the Mafia boss slipped his ring on her finger in front. Maybe everyone has a moment like this, when the world around them crumbles and they must keep standing, pretending they are still whole. For Elena Marquez, that moment came beneath crystal chandeliers and honeyed laughter under the watchful eyes of London's finest. The London Children's Trust Gala glittered inside Clarendon Hall, a place where light poured through glass ceilings like liquid gold. They called it a night of charity, but to Elena it felt more like a stage gilded in hypocrisy, where fortunes bought applause disguised as virtue. She stood beside Adrian Cole, her fiancé, the man she had once believed was love, destiny, and forever. Adrian looked impossibly flawless, his tuxedo sculpted to perfection, blonde hair tousled with intention, smile engineered for every camera angle. He didn't walk, he glided, self-assured, magnetic, and painfully aware of his own allure. Elena was merely his shadow. In her simple navy satin gown, hair tied low, she was a quiet note amid an orchestra of brilliance. As a cultural journalist, she understood true beauty, but here beauty had a price tag and a bloodline. "Smile, Elena," Adrian murmured, still facing the flashing lights. "They're watching." She obeyed, forcing the corners of her mouth upward. He never said you look beautiful when you smile. Only the cameras need you to. A crystalline voice sliced through the crowd. "Adrian, I thought you'd abandoned us tonight." Vivian Langford, heiress of the Langford banking dynasty, glided toward them with the poise of someone who knew exactly where the light would fall. Diamonds pooled at her throat like gilt. "Elena Marquez," Adrian said casually, "my fiancé." Vivian smiled, razor thin. "How lovely! Is that gown vintage?" "It belonged to my mother," Elena answered softly. "How sentimental," Vivian replied sweetly. A few people still cling to the past these days." Laughter rippled nearby. Adrian's hand tightened on Elena's arm, not to comfort her, but to keep her silent. The sting bloomed inside her chest. She had long known that his heart was drifting toward women like Vivian, born in silk and trained to weaponize a smile. Elena spent the next hour adrift among crystal glasses and fake laughter. The air felt syrup thick with perfume and pride. She wanted to leave, but Adrian leaned down and whispered, "Stay, I have an announcement." At 10 o'clock, the orchestra fell silent. The host called Adrian Cole, London's golden visionary, to the stage. Elena's heart swelled with pride. Maybe he would finally speak of their wedding or the charity they'd discussed, but instead he tore her world apart. "Ladies and gentlemen," Adrian began, voice smooth and warm, "tonight is about the future of this city, of its children, and about honesty." He paused, eyes finding hers. The smile remained, but the warmth was gone. "For the past year, I've been engaged to an incredible woman, Elena Marquez. She's intelligent, kind, and she's helped me realize what I truly need in life." Whispers fluttered through the hall. Elena's pulse quickened. "And so," he continued, "with all respect, I must announce that our engagement ends here." The room froze. A silence so sharp it rang. Her heart constricted, each beat a wound. "But I don't believe in endings," he added softly. "I believe in beginnings." From the wings emerged Vivian Langford, a vision in emerald silk. Adrian reached for her hand, smiling for the cameras, and kissed her. Under the blinding glare of the spotlight, flashes erupted like gunfire. Elena's knees weakened. The ballroom spun in a kaleidoscope of pity and scandal. He traded up. Poor thing never saw it coming. She tried to breathe, but the air thickened into fog. The spotlight pinned her like a fragile statue, cracking in slow motion. There was no escape, no voice left to call her own, only the cruel rhythm of applause for someone else's triumph. The silence inside the ballroom was so heavy, it seemed to vibrate the crystal glasses on the tables. Elena stood under the harsh white light, eyes wide, body locked in place. For a breathless moment, she wished she could vanish, dissolve into nothing. But the world stood still with her, frozen in voyeuristic fascination, waiting to see how the broken girl would fall. Then, somewhere in the back of the hall, a ripple disturbed the silence. Someone was walking forward, unhurried, unannounced, unstoppable. A man dressed in black cut through the frozen crowd, and the air shifted around him, heavy and electric. The light caught his face, sharp lines, calm strength, danger wrapped in restraint. Recognition spread before his name was spoken. Lorenzo Vega. It passed through the room like a curse. The CEO of Vega Group, Europe's largest private security empire. The man whispered to hold governments in his pocket and bury enemies where sunlight couldn't find them. He didn't belong at events like this, but then again, Vega didn't belong anywhere. He owned wherever he stood. Elena watched him move closer, each step deliberate, measured, carrying the weight of unspoken command. People parted without a word, drawn back by instinct. The gold band on his finger caught the light, a small, perfect symbol of dominance. When he reached the stage, where Adrian Cole still clutched Vivian Langford's hand, the smile on Adrian's face collapsed. For the first time that night, he looked like a man who understood fear. "Vega," Adrian stammered, trying to keep his voice steady. "I didn't realize you were here." Lorenzo's gaze swept over the room, cold and precise. His voice, when it came, was low and measured, each word falling with the weight of authority. "You've forgotten who allowed you to build your empire, haven't you?" The silence snapped tight. A few swallowed hard. Others froze entirely. Adrian gave a shaky laugh, desperate, hollow. "I don't know what you mean." Lorenzo's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, more like a blade glinting before it cuts. "Don't pretend. I despise pretending." Then he turned to Elena. The moment his eyes met hers, the entire world fell away. No music, no whispers, no air, only the unbearable space between them. There was no pity in that gaze, only recognition, sharp and dangerous. It was as though he saw her stripped of the humiliation, the brokenness, the weakness, and saw something else instead, something that belonged to him. He walked toward her, unhurried but inevitable. She wanted to step back, but her body disobeyed. The distance closed until she could feel the warmth radiating off him. The air seemed to hum with invisible current. He raised his hand, calloused, sun-browned, marked by faint scars, and brushed away a tear on her cheek. It wasn't gentle, but it wasn't cruel. It simply was. His voice was deep and quiet, carrying through the silence like smoke. "Don't waste your tears on the weak. You belong to power." A murmur rippled through the crowd, then vanished, strangled by fear. Lorenzo looked down at her hand, the bare ring finger glinting under the lights. He slid his own ring free, gold, engraved with a soaring falcon, and placed it on her finger. The act was slow, deliberate, ritualistic, as though the world itself had been rewritten in that moment. Elena stared at him, at the ring, at the audacity of what was happening. The light flashed across its surface, turning it into a burning mark. Then he spoke, his voice deep enough to shake the room. "Elena Marquez will be my wife." The declaration shattered the quiet like a blade slicing glass. No one spoke. No one moved. A few gasped. Others looked away. The power in his voice was not performance. It was decree. Adrian's complexion drained of color. He looked ready to vanish into the floor. Lorenzo didn't spare him another glance. He took Elena's hand, firm, steady, unyielding, and began to lead her out of the room. The crowd parted instinctively, terrified and entranced. The heavy doors closed behind them with a deep, resonant thud. And when silence finally released its grip, the whispers began to slither through the air. Did Vega just claim her? Is that power or madness? In London, they're the same. Outside, the noise of the gala still echoed faintly through the glass doors as they left, fading with every step. Elena didn't know where they were going, only that Lorenzo's hand held hers firmly. Inescapable, yet not cruel. The shock still blurred everything. The lights, the whispers, the disbelief. The world had shrunk to the rhythm of his steady footsteps cutting through London's frozen night. A sleek black car waited at the curb. The driver opened the door without a word. Lorenzo guided her inside and followed, the door closing with a heavy thud, like the sealing of fate. The outside world disappeared. Elena sat rigid. Her throat burned from holding back too many words. When the car finally began to move, she found her voice trembling. "What did you just do? Who do you think you are, declaring me your wife in front of everyone?" He didn't turn his head. The glow of the city lights slid across his face, half illumination, half shadow. He looked like a ghost haunting his own empire. "I saved you," he said simply, his tone even, detached. "You don't understand, Elena. After tonight, you're not invisible anymore. You're part of my board, and that means they'll notice you." "They?" she whispered. "Who are they?" He turned then, his eyes black as oil and twice as deep. "My enemies, which now makes them yours." She laughed bitterly, the sound cracking in her throat. "I don't need protection, and I won't be anyone's possession, no matter how powerful he thinks he is." Lorenzo tilted his head, unbothered. "The world out there isn't safe for you anymore. You don't understand this game. When I claimed you tonight, it wasn't about ownership, it was survival." The car stopped before a towering glass building overlooking the Thames. Its mirrored walls shimmered under the city lights. A tall man, Marco, his bodyguard, opened the doors silently. The air smelled of steel, leather, and quiet command. The elevator rose soundlessly to the top floor. When the doors slid open, Elena stepped into a vast penthouse with walls of glass and a skyline that looked endless. London glittered below like a sea of diamonds. The space was immaculate, minimalist, monochrome, soulless. Beauty drained of warmth. "This will be your residence," Lorenzo said in his calm, managerial tone. She turned sharply to face him. "No, I have my own home." "Not anymore," he replied, utterly composed. "My people will collect your things. Your lease ends tomorrow." "You can't do that," she shouted, her voice breaking. He stepped closer, his voice low but resonant, enough to make the air tremble. "I can, because if you walk out that door, someone will find you before sunrise. And they won't be as merciful as I am. You survived tonight because I stood between you and them. Without that—" He paused, his gaze darkening. you would already be gone. She took a step back, her spine pressing against the cold glass. Below her, the river sparkled like molten metal, beautiful and merciless. She wanted to scream, to shatter the silence, but fear held her in place. A soft voice interrupted. An older woman appeared at the doorway, her silver hair neatly tied back. "Mr. Vega," she said gently, "everything is prepared." He nodded once. "This is Rosa, the housekeeper. She'll help you settle in." Rosa smiled kindly, though her eyes betrayed unease, the understanding that the woman she was addressing wasn't a guest, but someone quietly kept. Marco stood near the door, hands clasped behind his back, his expression unreadable. He too was there to protect what did not belong to itself. Elena looked around. Everything gleamed: marble, glass, chrome. Perfect, expensive, lifeless. The silence pressed in on her like velvet wrapping around a cage. In that reflection, she saw not a woman broken, but a woman claimed. Elena Marquez was no longer the discarded lover. She was now the marked possession of Lorenzo Vega, and the ring on her finger glimmered like the seal of a kingdom she never asked to rule. The days that followed drifted through a haze of silence. The penthouse high above the Thames felt like a suspended world, untouched by time or sound. Elena grew used to waking in a place too perfect to be real. Clean lines, polished glass, and an emptiness that whispered like static. Each morning, Rosa brought her coffee, with gentle hands and eyes that carried quiet pity. Marco still stood guard by the door, silent as a statue carved from duty. And Lorenzo, he was a shadow, moving through the night. He left before dawn, returned long after the city had fallen into its neon hush. One morning, Elena opened her phone and froze. Her face was everywhere. Headlines screamed in bold letters, "Elena Marquez, the enigmatic fiancé of Lorenzo Vega." Photographs from the gala, her trembling smile and haunted eyes under the blinding light, flooded every tabloid feed. From cultural journalist to queen of the underworld, the woman who made Lorenzo Vega break his own rules. Within days, she had transformed from a pitied victim into a new myth, the woman who tamed the dark. A crown she never wanted, forged by fear and fascination. That night, Lorenzo returned. He tossed his keys on the counter, removed his jacket with the same effortless grace that drove her mad. She waited in the living room, her voice raw from days of unspoken questions. "What did you do to Adrian?" He paused. His expression didn't change. "Why ask?" "The whole city knows," she burst out. "His company's collapsing, stocks are crashing, investors pulling out. His name's being dragged through the dirt, all in a matter of days. Don't tell me that's coincidence." Lorenzo said nothing for a moment. Then he crossed to the bar and poured a glass of whiskey. The sound of liquid hitting crystal echoed like a ticking clock. "No one insults what bears my name," he said quietly. "He humiliated you. That makes it my concern. In my world, there are debts that can only be settled one way." Elena stared at him, torn between rage and disbelief. Is this about honor or possession? He met her gaze. For the first time, she saw something shift behind the darkness of his eyes, not fury but fatigue, the kind of weariness that came from holding up a collapsing empire alone. "There's no difference," he murmured. "Both must be protected by blood." She fell silent. Outside, the city glittered with indifferent beauty. She couldn't decide whether she feared him more for his cruelty or his conviction. Yet as he turned toward the window, the golden light caught his profile, and for the briefest instant, she saw the fracture, the loneliness hidden beneath the steel. He stood there, staring out at the river, the amber of his drink glowing like molten glass. His voice dropped to a whisper, almost to himself. People think power is a crown. They don't realize it's a chain. Every decision, every fall, every silence, all of it just to keep the name alive. Elena said nothing. She only watched him, his tall frame outlined against the lights of the city, shoulders drawn as if under an invisible weight. In that moment, she understood. Lorenzo Vega wasn't a monster. He was a man imprisoned by his own throne. And she, wearing his ring, was learning to breathe inside the same golden cage, where power and loneliness were two sides of the same coin. The message arrived on a cold London evening, the sky burning crimson against the mist. Lorenzo stood by the window, glass in hand, his eyes darkening as he read. Elena didn't need to ask. She knew it wasn't good. "Mikhail Volkov wants dinner," he said quietly, "and he requested that you come with me." She frowned. "Why me?" "Because he wants to see what all of London's whispering about." Lorenzo's gaze dropped to her, slow and deliberate. "He wants to know if Vega's fiancé is a weakness." She wanted to refuse, but one measured nod from him ended the argument. That night, Rosa handed her a sea-green satin gown that shimmered like water. "Mr. Vega chose it," she murmured, her tone halfway between worry and pity. Elena barely recognized the woman staring back in the mirror. Bare shoulders, silk-smooth hair, eyes rimmed in quiet defiance. The journalist was gone. In her place stood a symbol polished for war. The restaurant in Mayfair glowed with the kind of opulence that smelled of blood and money. Red velvet, gold trim, and the scent of vodka and roasted meat hung thick in the air. Every man there wore a tailored suit and a weapon. Mikhail Volkov sat at the head of the table, silver hair, massive frame, and a smile that could carve bone. The moment Lorenzo and Elena entered, conversation died. Only their footsteps echoed across the marble floor. "Mikhail," Lorenzo greeted, his tone smooth as ice. "Vega," Volkov replied, smiling wider, "and this must be your new muse." His gaze cut to Elena, dissecting her. "So delicate. I didn't think you liked fragile things." The air froze. A few men shifted, fingers brushing under their jackets. Lorenzo stayed silent, jaw tight. Before the silence could suffocate them, Elena spoke, her voice calm, her eyes unwavering. "Mr. Volkov," she said softly, "Mr. Vega doesn't collect things. He only keeps what's truly priceless." The room stopped breathing. Her own heartbeat thundered in her ears. Then Volkov laughed, a deep, sharp sound that shattered the tension. "Priceless, huh? I see why you like her, Vega. She's got fangs." The danger passed. Men eased back into their seats. Lorenzo didn't reply, but when his eyes met hers, they burned. Anger and admiration inseparable. Dinner unfolded like a chess match. Every word was a move, every smile a warning. Elena held her ground, knowing one mistake could cost her life. When the car finally left the restaurant, silence followed them like smoke. Then Lorenzo's voice cut through the dark. "Do you have any idea he could have killed you for that?" Elena turned, fire sparking in her eyes. "And what? You want me to live my life afraid? To be your obedient shadow?" The car halted at a red light. The glow washed over their faces, two prisoners of the same gilded world. Rage, fear, and desire collided in the narrow space between them. Lorenzo grabbed her chin, his voice rough. "You don't know what it takes to keep you alive." "And you don't know," she whispered, "that I'd rather die than live as your reflection." The space between them vanished. The kiss came like an explosion, fierce, bruising, desperate. It tasted of whiskey, smoke, and surrender. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless, eyes locked in something raw and wordless. But beneath that fire, a silence began to bloom, the kind that hides secrets. Days later, when Lorenzo left for Moscow, that silence followed Elena like a shadow. The following days passed like a fever dream. Lorenzo spoke less, his silences heavier. Then he left. Moscow was all he said, leaving Elena alone in the penthouse, surrounded by Rosa's quiet footsteps and Marco's watchful presence. But silence can be the loudest sound of all. She began to notice small things: interrupted calls, envelopes with no return address, faint metallic knocks from the elevator shaft at midnight. The air itself felt like it was holding secrets. One evening, when the world outside was wrapped in rain, Elena stood before Lorenzo's locked office. The door had always been off limits, like him, cold and forbidden. She didn't know what pushed her closer: curiosity, fear, or the desperate need to understand the man who had claimed her life. The key was easy to find, hidden in the drawer of his nightstand. The safe behind a painting opened with a click that sounded far too loud. Inside lay stacks of documents, a family crest, and an old leather-bound book, its cover cracked and edges stained with age. Registro di Sangue, the Book of Blood. Each page was a ledger: names, dates, debts, payments. Her pulse hammered as she read. Politicians, bankers, rivals, all marked with a red X. Then her eyes froze on one name: Enzo Marquez, her grandfather. Next to it, a single line: $100,000 for silence regarding Giacomo Vega, 1962. Her hands shook. She turned the page. Another note followed, in sharp, precise handwriting: the story of the honor debt, fabricated to preserve the family image. Never disclose? The floor tilted beneath her. Every word Lorenzo had told her, the story of legacy, of debt and fate, was a lie. He hadn't saved her out of honor. He'd taken her because he wanted her, because possession was the only language he understood. The room shrank. Her breath came shallow. Tears slid down her cheeks, not from heartbreak, but from the bitter clarity of truth. She had believed in the myth of him, in the monster who protected her, in the savior wearing a devil's crown. But it had all been a game. The sharp crack of glass snapped her back. A window fractured. Cold air tore into the room, carrying a shadow. Marco's shout echoed from the hall. "Miss Marquez, get back!" But the gunshot came first. She didn't hear the faint click of the tracking device Lorenzo's enemies had planted days ago. The main door burst open. 2 men stormed in, trench coats, guns drawn. The one in front was younger, his beauty sculpted and merciless. She knew those eyes, gray and metallic. Nikolai Volkov, Mikhail's heir. Marco hit the floor, blood spreading fast. Elena stood frozen, clutching the book like a lifeline. Nikolai approached, his tone disturbingly calm. "We didn't come to kill you," he said. "Unless you make it necessary. My grandfather sends his regards. Seems Mr. Vega collects more than women. He collects secrets." His gaze flicked to the leather book in her hands. Elena stepped back, but the wall of glass stopped her. Below, the Thames shimmered like a blade waiting to cut. Footsteps echoed, more men, more guns. Her breathing quickened. Marco groaned from the floor, whispering hoarsely, "Run." But there was nowhere left to run. In that instant, Elena understood power, love, truth. They had all become the same thing, and they were all equally deadly. The smell of gunpowder still lingered in the air. Marco lay motionless by the door, his breathing shallow. Elena clutched the ledger to her chest, her mind racing but her eyes steady. Nikolai stepped closer, the gleam of his gun catching the light. "Give it to me," he said softly, voice like a blade. "I'll make your death quick." She drew a slow breath, tasting smoke, metal, and fear. Then, with a calmness that didn't seem possible, she said, "If you shoot, you'll lose something far more valuable than this book." Nikolai hesitated, eyes narrowing. "What are you talking about?" "Elena Marquez is just a name, but this ledger holds proof of an alliance between Vega and Camorra, the same one your beloved uncle erased from history. Are you sure you want to touch it?" Her words froze the room. Nikolai exchanged a glance with his men, his steps slower now, uncertain. Elena knew she was gambling with her life. She backed toward the desk, her fingers brushing against the hidden switch Lorenzo once showed her, half teasing, half warning. "If you ever find yourself in trouble, press this. I'll come." She pressed it. A mechanical click echoed through the walls. One heartbeat of silence, then the glass exploded. Gunfire erupted. A dark figure burst through the chaos. Lorenzo. His eyes burned like wildfire, cold and furious all at once. In seconds, the room became a blur of motion. Gunshots, shouts, silence. Men fell before they realized they were dead. Nikolai raised his weapon, but Lorenzo's bullet found him first. The gun clattered to the floor. Then it was over. Smoke curled upward. Blood pooled under the shattered light. Lorenzo moved toward her, chest heaving. When he saw her still standing, something in him broke. "Elena," he breathed, her name trembling in his voice. She barely had time to speak before he pulled her into his arms. His heartbeat thundered against her ear, wild, human, terrified. "You made it," she whispered, half laughing, half crying. "I should never have left you," he said, voice raw. He held her tighter, as if letting go would undo everything he'd fought for. After a long moment, he drew back, eyes haunted. "The debt, it was never real," he confessed. "I invented it. I just wanted to keep you near, but now you're free." The words hung between them like falling glass. Elena looked at him, not as the ruthless man the world feared, but as the one who finally laid down his armor. She lifted a trembling hand, brushed his cheek, and said softly, "I don't need to be saved anymore. I choose to stay, but as your partner, not your captive." A faint smile ghosted across his lips, not arrogance, but relief. He took her hand, bowed his head, pressing his forehead into her palm. "Partner," he murmured, as if sealing a vow. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, blue and red lights flickering across the broken glass. Inside, amid the scent of smoke and blood, two souls stood together, between ruin and rebirth, between power and forgiveness, in the quiet after the storm. 2 months after the attack, London had slipped back into rhythm, calm on the surface, restless underneath. In the hidden corridors of power, one name was whispered with a mixture of awe and fear: Elena Marquez. She was no longer Lorenzo Vega's fiancé. She was the woman beside him in every closed-door meeting, the one politicians and crime lords alike feared to underestimate. When Lorenzo spoke, they listened. When Elena stayed silent, they trembled. In the underground conference room of Vega Group, cold light gleamed off a black marble table. A digital map spread before them, their empire stretching from London to Berlin, to Moscow. Yet one red mark pulsed on the screen. Volkov. He's not dead, Elena said evenly. Lorenzo nodded. Mikhail Volkov never dies. He hides until the blood grows thick enough to flow again. Determination flickered in her eyes. Then we end what he started. 3 nights later, Intel confirmed Volkov's location, an abandoned warehouse on the banks of the Daugava River in Latvia. Lorenzo prepared for war, but Elena stopped him. You're not going alone this time. She arrived at the airstrip in a tailored black suit, her hair pulled back, eyes sharp with resolve. She carried no gun, only a signal device and a blade slender as a whisper. Power wasn't about firepower, it was about precision. The night storm came with fire and gunshots. Flames roared through the warehouse like the breath of a beast. Lorenzo and Elena moved through the smoke like synchronized shadows. Every step, every shot was a rhythm, violent, exact, inevitable. When they reached Mikhail Volkov, the old man was waiting, his pale eyes still burning. Vega, he rasped with a laugh. I thought you'd fall because of her. Instead, she made you far more dangerous. Elena stepped forward, calm and unflinching. You're wrong. I didn't make him stronger. We made each other. Volkov lifted his gun, but Elena's blade flashed first, a silver streak cutting through the smoke. The final gunshot echoed like a bell. When silence returned, Volkov lay still, eyes frozen in disbelief. Outside, the rain began to fall. Fire hissed and died. Smoke curled into the cold Latvian sky. Lorenzo stood beside Elena, blood on his sleeve, exhaustion in his gaze. I thought I lost you, he whispered. She looked at him, voice soft but sure. You didn't lose me. We just found who we were. A month later, Vega Group rose again, larger, stronger. The financial world called them the twin sovereigns. An empire ruled not by fear, but by balance. Elena was no longer a shadow in Lorenzo's orbit. She was the light that shared his darkness. That night, they stood before the penthouse window, the city glowing beneath them. The Thames reflected 1,000 lights like falling stars. Lorenzo reached for her hand, thumb brushing the ring that gleamed on her finger. Once a mark of possession, now a symbol of partnership. You know, she said softly, they'll always think you made me a queen. He tilted his head, smiling faintly. And the truth? She turned toward the city, her voice steady, echoing like a final narration. I was reborn from my own ashes. They say he made me a queen, but no, we made each other. The light caught her ring, silver, gold, and blood intertwined. The trinity of love, power, and darkness. No savior, no victim. Only 2 souls who built a throne in the dark, together.